So thank you for joining our next Masters on Masters edition. Today we are going to talk about the creative process of storytelling. We have two great talents and they're coming together again to dig a little deeper when it comes to imagination, world building, story design, and the independence of an artist. And I have the honor to introduce you to Oscar-winning writer and producer Nick Vallelonga and Emmy nominee and True Detectives creator Nic Pizzolatto. Both true masters of the craft. I think we can be really happy that we have the opportunity today to learn from you and your expertise. And I got to thank both of you again for being with us. And I will just disappear, sit back, listen carefully, and so does our audience and our community and all our friends of Berlin series. And again, thank you. I'll let Nick and Nick talk now to each other and hopefully inspire each other as well. So thank you again. And yeah, you go ahead.
Hi, Nick.
Thanks, Mark. Hey, Nick.
This is a great honor to speak to you and learn
same,
from you.
Please.
I think they wanted to focus on True Detective Season 3, but before we get into that, I just wanted to talk about your background and where you grew up and some of your influences and how you started writing. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which is kind of a mid-sized refinery town. It's oil and gas and petroleum refinery, and you know, it's been completely ravaged by hurricanes the past few years, and it's got a couple of casinos in it now, but all the trees are gone. Went to Louisiana State University, bummed around for a while after school, and sort of decided I needed to you know, put my hand to writing in earnest or go to law school or something. And I was a visual artist.
The writing when you were younger.
When I was younger, I was a visual artist, and that's actually how I got to university. Was I had a visual arts scholarship, and I drew, and I was a painter, and
you were a comic book, correct?
No, more like fine arts illustration.
Okay.
And you know, I guess when I was a kid, I would draw, you know, my own comic books and stuff. But always deeply into film, and even though television wasn't of a great quality back when I was a kid, it was still a constant presence to me, and sometimes a comfort. But where I come from, if I were to say, you know, I wanted to go make television or make films, that would have been like announcing you wanted to colonize Neptune, you know. At best, people would tell you good luck with an ironic grin. And so in the course of university, I think I became kind of dispirited at what I saw as a manufactured value and a kind of lack of general aesthetics in the fine arts I was doing. And I had gotten deeply into philosophy and literature and some of my other classes. And I was having trouble staying a visual artist because the materials are really expensive. And you know, sort of like film and TV requires this huge infrastructure of this big machine, and there's got to be all, like, you have to pass through multiple gatekeepers, sometimes on a daily basis. And so I thought about which of the arts I could turn to that had the lowest overhead and might act as a bridge to the other things I wanted to do, and that pulled me towards writing. But it was my last year in university when I took my first writing class, and then when I returned to it a few years later to because I was in an MFA program, which the only thing I expected to get out of that was a few years to just focus on what I could learn about that craft. And then I started publishing short stories and things like that. I had a novel.
Well, hold on. So
And
hold on.
use
So
that as a bridge.
you're ripping through this. So I mean, as a
It's not that interesting.
no, it's very interesting because you're saying that you decided this more in college. Was it something like were you a big
Well, I was
reader as
like,
a
I
child?
was,
Did you read a lot?
I
Did you
was
pick
something, I
your
was
movies in your
something
head?
of a reader. I mean, I was something of a reader. And I was always alone, so I was always drawing or I was always reading. And what I really loved was story. And, I think I don't remember how young I was, but it was really, really young. When I had the sense, and it's just done nothing more than solidify as I've gotten older. But I really had the sense the world ran on stories. You know, I could watch the television and flame or mollify my parents depending on a story. I could I could see that I could see that the way people carried themselves in life had a lot to do with stories they told themselves. And that even a lot of the human drama I watched around me were people debating their stories and trying to disabuse one another of the stories they held to. So there was something magic about story, and I mean that in the real term of magic, not something romantic. It's like old Stone Age magic. The marks on the wall, translate to the audience in that cave as a different kind of consciousness. So it seemed like story and words were some kind of codex to the consciousness I was experiencing and the people around me seemed to experience.
Wow, because the depth of your writing is so amazing, and
Um,
part of that to me, I was always wondering like what type of reading did you do? I mean, True Detective took a genre that everyone loves, everyone has known, but really you created something brand new with it. I mean, if you think of the classic, Raymond Chandler, and then
yeah,
more
yeah, and
Spokane type of
yeah,
things, but which have been done and then copied and tried to emulate those type of things, but you created your own thing. And so I was wondering, like, what led you there to because your take on it was original and fresh and new, and obviously caught everyone's attention by its huge success.
well, thanks. So I I I read a ton of literature, pretty much from university on, and definitely in the master's program. So I discovered all of Dostoevsky and all of Conrad, and Faulkner's always meant a lot to me. Um, and then sort of I did always like the police drama or the crime drama. I mean, I was always attracted to stories about we're essentially working class worlds, and the uh, the genre itself sort of came with these built-in story hooks about a crime and what to do with it. And at the time I wrote the pilot for True Detective, um it was the summer my novel came out, and it got optioned for like no money. But um the the Hollywood literary agents who had sort of brokered the deal were the first time I ever got to talk to Hollywood agents. I was living in Indiana at the time. And I asked him, what do I have to do to get considered to write the script for this? And And since I have your ear, what do I need to do to become a showrunner on TV? I think that's a good place for me to be. And they were like, well, have you ever written scripts before? And I said, no. And they said, well, you need to write some scripts. And, if you give us, like, if you want to get into TV, if you write us a good spec script of an existing show and you come up with a really good original show and can write a script for it, if they're good, we can get you meetings. But once you take a meeting, it's up to you what happens. And I could tell they weren't taking me seriously because, I'm
They
sure
never do.
they I wouldn't have taken me seriously, and they specialized in selling the rights to literary works. So I bet every novelist they ever talked to was, like, hey, there's a lot more white space on a screenplay and it seems to pay better. How do I do that?
Yes.
But I was hungry, and it was within like 4 weeks, 5 tops. I wrote 6 television scripts, and
Wow.
one was a spec for the show Justified, because this was in 2010. Um, I wrote 3 episodes of a show I created that was set in Lake Charles, my hometown. I wrote a pilot for another show about bull riders, and then the 3rd pilot I wrote was True Detective. And, it was the same pilot that we shot.
Wow.
Um, and that in specific came when I was thinking about what my next novel would be at the time. And I I had this idea for a book that was going to, end up covering this 25-year span. And it was going to key on that genre of buddy cop, because part of me was very conscious of, if I'm writing books, I need a readership. If I'm making and it's especially if I'm making something that costs dozens of millions of dollars, I need an audience. So what are the audience's preferred genres that I could see working in, and maybe elevating at least in my conception of it, into something that is art for me, if other people can say it's whatever they want. um and so my idea for the novel, I was reading all this homicide detective research. Like, I read the big textbook, the practical uh handbook of
Yes.
homicide investigation, and like had all these books of checklists and investigative stuff, because I knew I was gearing up to write this novel, but I wanted to absorb this stuff psychically. Um, and so then I started writing it, and the novel was going to be a series of dueling voices. It was either going to be Hart talking on the page or Cole talking on the page, and maybe they'd alternate chapters. And then as I was just futzing with this, because it's just straight dialogue from each man, I was like, well, maybe this should be a play. Maybe it should be a play about, like, these 2 guys on separate ends of the stage, and they're telling these somewhat differing accounts of this story. And then I thought, what would this might really work best as is a TV show. Um, and the conceit of the interrogations in the TV show, uh, I don't think that came from anything so much as Errol Morris documentaries. Um,
Hmm.
I I I find there's so much character there in those Errol Morris documentaries, and it's people speaking straight into the camera. And I still think the best special effect in the world is the human face, well photographed. When you've got the right face. So the interrogation is a tired trope in the police genre. Um, but there were lots of things in True Detective where I wanted to take the tropes of the genre. I wanted to take the cliched tropes of the genre and sort of present it in such a new way,
Yeah, that's
and
what. Yeah, and you did.
but
That's what you
with such
accomplished. Yeah.
radical characters that it it would even like remind people why they like shows like this. And so then I transferred.
So it was a conscious design by you to say, how do I break into this TV movie thing? So I'm going to design something that's going to work for that, but yet
Well,
still.
I mean, I wrote six scripts, and True Detective was just one of them. And
Well,
when I wrote
let me
it,
ask you this before you go forward for the
yep,
listeners here,
of course.
for writers. So, how did you? Like I said to you earlier, your writing is so amazing.
Well,
When I was young and I read books, I pictured movies, and that's what made me want to make films. And films themselves wanted me to make films, but my reading, I would picture them as movies. What was interesting to me about True Detective, all three seasons, is that while I was watching it, it was like I was reading a book. It was richer than just the movie. I
thank you.
felt the depth of a book, yet I was watching it on TV. So you almost did it in reverse for me. So
Thank you.
my question to you is, writing short stories and then novels, when you first started writing these first few episodes, the spec ones, and then the one you wanted to do on your own, did you find a difference in how you had to approach the writing? Because, like you said, there's a lot of blank
Yeah.
space on
Oh
a
yeah.
script.
Well, I would have expected it to be more jarring, but it was actually uh it I'm just telling you the truth. It came so easy.
Easy.
Because I recognized the restrictions of the form, and then I found those restrictions very freeing. Because a lot of the time when you're working with prose, you're faced with an infinitude of decisions. You can go into the consciousness of that tree if you want. You can fuck around describing a waterfall if you don't know where you're going next. You can sit down and just let voice carry the piece.
Yes.
And the screenplay, the dramaturgy brings everything down to character and action. And you can have some descriptions, but that's it. It has to be very disciplined. And
Yeah.
now within those restrictions, you can do a lot of really, really interesting stuff. And if you have a penchant for seeing visually and for seeing how the language of the visuals will fit together, um, it it can feel very natural. And so that's how it felt to me. Because I I could get straight to the people talking, you know, like I didn't have to pad the world with the novelist's description. Um, Although, if you read any of my scripts, like they do have these novelistic descriptions of where we are and what's happening. And, I tend to direct a lot on the page, but it seemed to work well for the actors, because what I'm trying to do for them is allow them to make their own performance foolproof, so that they understand the complexity of emotion and the motivations of a scene because it's there on the page, and then they can dig in.
I
But
agree.
so
My attempt to try to, I want the reader to see the movie.
mhm,
My description, I used to write lots of long descriptions, but I almost break my descriptions up into almost shots in an odd way. So you're seeing it, and
mhm.
so everyone has their own way of doing it. But I'm like you,
Well,
I'm almost directing. It's
yeah,
on the page.
I call shots too. And when I write action, I write every beat of that action because
Yes,
I am seeing it in my
you're
head,
seeing it.
It's not just, yeah, a gunfight ensues or something.
Right.
This is six, this is 6 pages of a granularly detailed gunfight. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and the way I work has evolved, or sort of gone in uh process in engaging the process like different than I used to. And so, yeah, I find myself
Yeah, so I
whittling
want to
away
get
at
to that
stuff.
too because
I find myself
there's
like, I'll give you 2 lines of description, but they're going to be great. And even directing on the page, I'll say something about a character that a director can't convey. I just gave you an abstract description of an emotional state, but the actor's going to make a decision on how to convey
yes.
that, and it's going to be a very and it's going to come from a considered place.
So and I could we can jump around all over the place. So uh, I want to go to when you finally wrote the True Detective pilot.
Mhm.
Again, how did that get going? And then I want to get into how your writing turned into your directing. But how did you actually finally get the True Detective up and running?
Okay, so when I had all those scripts, I got a lot of meetings and I got some jobs. And I took a staff writing job on a TV show. And the way True Detective happened actually was like people were interested in the show about my hometown. People were interested in the bull riding show, but True Detective was like never something I was going to give somebody else, and like never not be there to execute it and edit it the way I wanted, and I would just hold on to it until we could do it. But I was meeting the producer Steve Golan, who passed pretty recently. I was meeting him in New York City about writing a remake of um, the the Prophet, that French film.
Yeah.
You remember that? It was
Yes.
that's a perfect movie. It's a perfect movie, one of the best prison movies ever. And I was taking the meeting because I loved that film so much. Uh, I I didn't really think it should be remade. It just came out, and I just didn't want somebody to mess it up. Um, and so when I sat down with Steve, and the first thing he said was, "So why should I remake this movie?" And I said, "Oh, I didn't realize we were having that kind of meeting. You shouldn't remake this movie. It just came out and it's fucking perfect. Like at best, at best, you're not going to shame yourself, but you're not going to improve on it." Uh, and he goes, "So you don't have a take or anything?" I was like, "Yeah, I got a take, and my take, instead of revolving around the Muslims in the prison, it revolved around Native Americans and um but he said, "Well, that sounds pretty good." I was like, "Yeah, but you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it. That's why the first thing you said was, why should you remake this movie?" And he goes, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, this is what you should do." And I had my iPad with me and I pulled up the script for True Detective and I passed that to him. And like he just looked over the first couple of pages and he's like, "Will you send this to me?" I was like, "Yeah, for sure." Um, and so I sent it, and Steve was really bullish on it, and he started and ran Anonymous Content, um, the production and management company, um, and he wanted to put a director to it, and Alejandro Inarritu wanted to do it, and I met with him a couple of times, and he was very, I mean, he was very enthusiastic about the script, and he thought we should have a second one, and that and maybe wanted to see if I could do it again, and it's fine. So I wrote a second episode, and Alejandro loved it, and so we're gonna wait on him a while, but then he went to make The Revenant, and The Revenant was like this insurmountable mountain that uh, they kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed, and so we had to move on from there, and That was probably for me a really good thing, because if Alejandro Inarritu was directing those, I wouldn't have been allowed on set, and I admire the man greatly. So then we looked at a lot of other directors, settled on Carey, and the actors people were suggesting to me, they were all a bit more of the younger and hot right now variety. Some of them very good actors, but I kept saying, like, no, these guys look like boys to me. These need to be men, and they need to be men with life in their faces. So we went around and around on who that might be, and whatever names came up. I saw The Lincoln Lawyer, and that was the first time I had seen McConaughey in something that wasn't a romantic comedy, and it felt like a decade. I don't know, but I remembered, like, oh yeah, this guy's a man. And I thought about him, and I read that he had just done Killer Joe with William Friedkin, that's based on a Tracy Letts play, and something just kind of told me, if he's not doing these romantic comedies anymore, and he's willing to, and I knew the play, and I said, and he's willing to play Joe in Killer Joe, this might be something that he's interested in. And so I talked to the other producers, and I liked him for Rust, because I also, a lot of the actors being suggested for Rust were what you would think in some way to be the intellectual type, like they generally had a bookish quality to them, and like the character wasn't quite allowed to be, vibrant and strong and handsome. And so I liked him for Rust, but the other producers, like, nobody could see it. Matthew's a romantic actor. And I said, well, what about for Marty? And they're like, oh yeah, he'd be great for Marty. And so I got them to agree to submit it to him for Marty. And I had this feeling that if he reads this, if it gets to him to read, because the first words on the show are Russ Cole on the first page, it's Russ talking. He's gonna want to play Russ Cole. Like, if I was an actor, I would want to play Russ Cole.
So you had right from the beginning a lot of input. You were inputting.
I really did. I mean,
and almost as a director, in a way.
I've talked to, well, and I also remembered some other Matthew roles. Like, I remembered him in Frailty, this movie he did with Bill Pullman, where he spends the movie telling a story to Powers, I think it's Powers Booth, to a sheriff. And I even remember a dragon movie he made where he was a badass who fought dragons. And they were like some elements that were authentic and that you could really work with. But right from the start, you were involved. Not just, you're not handing in a script and then hoping that these guys go off and make it. You were obviously very like we're only because it's mine. So we're only doing this if I'm the showrunner. And sure enough, Matthew wanted to play Rust. Matthew helped us get Woody. I mean, I don't think Woody would have done it. I'm positive he wouldn't have if it wasn't for Matthew. And then, once the rubber starts hitting the road and you move into production, well, then I wrote 6 more episodes. Then we took it out. We got a lot of offers. Then I spent about 4 months writing the last 6 episodes. And then when the rubber starts to hit the road and you're in production, it doesn't matter. Like, showrunners get fired all the time. It doesn't matter if I said we're only doing this if I'm a showrunner. HBO bought it. This belongs to HBO now. And definitely the actors were the two muscle. You know, those are our 500-pound gorillas. It's not me or the director. We're nobodies. But I got to keep that level of guidance and involvement. I was on set every frame that we shot.
Good.
Because of the actors, Matthew and Woody were very, very supportive of me, and are really good friends to this day. So that's how that came about.
And then, how did you pick the director, Carrie? How did that come
We
about?
just talked to a few directors, and I thought Sin Nombre was a good movie, and felt he could do the job, and that I wasn't going, and that I wouldn't be in the shadow of some sort of Alejandro Inarritu figure who would just be able to take the reins. Because really, as a creator, once you get in there, your actors are your best advocate, and
But what made it also different was you writing every episode and then having one director direct every episode.
yeah, we
So
didn't think we were going to
how
do
was
the
that
one.
relationship with you and him?
It was fine with me. We didn't think he was going to do all the episodes, but then he wanted to, and we were like, sure. It was fine for me. I mean, I had a great time, and a great time working with Matthew and Woody on their scenes. We definitely had two different versions of the edited show. So there might have been some disagreement around that, but HBO chose which edit to air, and I believe it was the right one.
Yeah, worked out pretty good. So then, season two. Well, we'll go through this quick because they want me to focus on season three. But then season two, you got you there was several directors, I believe, right? And
Oh,
there was a lot more cooks in the kitchen. It seems.
well, yeah, but I mean, I wanted to make it like a real TV show, not like some, I don't know, some like I wanted to be able to make it the way other people make TV shows. Um, and I'm very, very proud of season two, but our our production window kept shrinking. And so there were ways I had planned to, I believe, more successfully tie the storylines together, that left certain things a little obtuse and hard to follow. But also, the punk rock in me had the desire to sort of blow up expectations around what we built. And, like I was already discomfited in the first season to sort of see like aspects of fandom, that it's two different things to be a fan of something, and it's something else to hijack that something. And so even when there was so much, what do we want to see in our second season of True Detective from media, where I was like, your second season of True Detective.
Right.
Well, let me see. You like that buddy cop stuff? You like that fractured timeline narrative? You like all those driving scenes with people talking? You know, and got beaten up for it.
Well, you didn't want to
But
repeat yourself.
our production window kept shrinking so much because these other shows that were meant to air in June and August, like all stopped production, and I don't know what it was. I think it was, at least one of them was, they didn't have scripts, but something else. So we were supposed to premiere in October, and we ended up premiering in June. And I mean, we wrapped, couldn't have, I'm not sure the exact amount, but it was under 2 weeks before we aired.
Wow. Wow. So season 2, you did that, and I guess we'll get into season 3, which again you changed things up. I mean, so what was for the writers out there? What was your thought process of? I mean, the what you did with the 3 different time periods was really interesting and fresh and different, and to have that character and those all those different time periods and continue on this search about the missing kids. Where did you come up with that? What led you to that?
I was well, I was feeling a bit pretty burnout on the whole noir thing, you know. But I didn't, I wanted to do one more at some point. I was actually working on something else for HBO at the time, but I just had this notion of a detective who has to solve the mystery of who he is. And that I had an acquaintance experiencing Alzheimer's dementia. And I thought about a detective with that, and just what an ironic thing to approach with a detective. This constant unraveling of the clues that have to be daily reassembled to remind him who he is. And I just kind of started writing on it, and I was like, well, how? And then if you could tell this story, you'd also be telling the story of the man's life, which was very appealing to me, telling the long arc of a character's life, not just within the confines of the proceedings in the story. And I thought about, well, what if you had a case that took place here, came up again here, and was finally solved here. And then I could, have these different timelines. Well, what if I didn't so discreetly separate these timelines? What if I was actually braiding them together in one story? And then the strands of the rope would be reflecting one another and playing off one another contrapuntally, sort of, and sometimes converging in ways that were metaphysical almost. So that was very appealing to me because it seemed like a very high level challenge, and I liked the idea of examining this man's life, and and the high level challenge was that this is a detective story. So I'm not just showing you 3 timelines. And I'm not going to do any like bullshit where I leave the character's point of view and I'm showing the real killer or something, but their face is hit, like the camera never rises up to see their face or something. So because of these 3 timelines, if you really pay attention to the show, it's telling you what's going to happen all the time. Through its future story, it's telling you what already happened in the past. And so it's going to have to be the characters that keep the viewers interested, and it's going to be their interest in seeing, wait, how did it happen? Like
Yes.
if they mention how the middle timeline is concluded early on in the series, and they mention how it was concluded the first time,
Well, that's what's
So
brilliant about it. I mean, like,
that was the part that was hard is I
yeah,
was literally like, no tricks up my sleeve. I am not keeping anything from you. I'm not being cute or coy about anything. And we're just gonna see what happens. And then I knew when I started writing it, like right away, I knew, oh, at the end, he's finally gonna solve this and he's gonna forget that he solved it.
yeah, it's amazing.
Um, but what he's going to gain is himself. And and so then I knew, like, I like this story. I like this story. And I was writing on it a little bit, and I was like, oh shit, this is actually a true detective. You know, like this is actually like this, like for me, this is actually the true detective. This is the one that pulls the other two together into some kind of coherent trilogy, maybe. And
Yes.
I also thought that having broken free, for better or worse, of the conventions established in season one, I could now go back and revisit some of those structural uh, sort of conceits that I developed that first season, and see them in a new way. You know, see the interrogation, the officer statements in a new way. The fractured timeline in season one, well, that's nothing compared to this one. Like
Right.
the
Right.
season one, you just put part of the end throughout the series, and then the story that's being told catches up to the end. Like this is, it's all happening at once. Everything's happening at once, and the endings have already happened. And I don't want to be coy, and I don't want to create a bunch of red herrings, you know. And so I feel like for me, I'm proudest of it because it's it was for me the most humanistic of them, and it was it I don't it it felt more mature to me, and I was conscious that I wasn't trying to be anything else, and I wasn't thinking about anything else. I wasn't thinking about things I'd seen or things I'd read, um
Well, what
and
watching it for me was, as the third one. Um, Again, I had just worked with Mahershala, so I already was like, I couldn't wait to see what he was going to do in there. But as far as your writing
wow.
goes, I mean, you like I said, the first one you took a genre and spun it and did your own thing with it. The second one you followed through again. You didn't copy yourself. And this third one, I mean, you directed most of them, correct?
No,
Am
I
I
just
right about
directed no, I just directed 4 and 5.
You directed 4 and 5, and the
Mm.
writing, you also brought in David Milch to. It just seemed to me this one was really more like you kind of said it yourself, brought it all together somehow. So like I felt like
Yeah,
your imprint, even though your imprint is on all of it, it's all you. But it just seemed that this one really was different than the others. It stood out to me
thank
as much as I
thank
love
you.
the others, but this one
I
really
think
stood out.
I think 3, I mean, 3 came from my heart a lot,
Yeah.
and and things happened in 3 that I didn't know were gonna happen, you know. And David came in for about 3 weeks, you know, when I was working on episode 3, and that was such a great joy and such a gift.
Yeah,
And
amazing. Was that your
I
choice to bring him in? Was there a
oh,
specific
oh
reason why
yeah,
you did?
because yeah,
Why you
we
did?
had a we had a mutual producer in Scott Stevens. Scott Stevens has been my producing partner on all the True Detectives, and Scott Stevens produced Deadwood too. So he
Oh,
knew Dave was working. Dave had been working for a while on this Deadwood movie script, and I was just sort of kicking around, not really moved by what I was doing. And he suggested, you know, and I'd met Dave a couple of times before, and he suggested I go in with David, and you know, just like join the small group he has around him while he's writing his Deadwood movie. And so then I went into Dave's Deadwood thing for a few weeks, and that was beautiful. I mean, we talk about poetry and literature, and we had a mutual assistant at different points, Alessandra Demona, and she can tell you, like, there was this beautiful afternoon where we were like dueling banjos with the dialogue. Like, he was taking one person, I was taking the other, and I mean, so great. And then season 3, yeah, it came from my heart a lot. And I wrote the finale on a plane going back to Arkansas. I didn't write the whole finale, but I was working on it. And that hallucination Mahershala has of his wife in the last episode, which echoes the one from the 3rd episode. I did not know that was going to happen. And I did not know she was going to say the little speech she does, which is about a hopeful message as I can offer the world and still believe in it, which is, she says, what if the ending's not really the ending? What if these other things happen? Which we can interpret as Mahershala's subconscious pulling together the clues he's discerned. And she tells him a different story. And she says, all this life, all this loss, what if it's just one long story that keeps going until it heals itself? Wouldn't that be a story worth telling? Wouldn't that be a story worth hearing? And I think at that time in my life, I was trying to tell myself that story. So I remember being on a plane when that wrote itself. And yeah, it had a lot to do with my daughter and sort of staring into the dark and saying, it doesn't have anything on hope and courage. Like, hope and courage will stand against that anytime.
Well, your choice of an actor, you needed the right person to bring that out, because the layers that were in that character,
Oh man,
were amazing, and the
I,
depth
I
and the
couldn't
heart,
even
the
imagine.
mind, the heart, the soul, all of it. And I read somewhere that he wasn't originally your first choice for that. You were interested in
No, I was
another
just,
role, right?
well, just being me, and just, working. I had made Wayne white and his partner Roland was black. And they had asked Mahershala if he might be interested in the partner, and Mahershala wanted to play Wayne. And so then he, wanted to meet me to talk about it, and of course. And then the story he told me as we talked, I just listened to him. And, I was like, well, I believe in him, but let me see if I can go back to these scripts and reverse these races, because it's also going to change how people, react to Wayne, and sometimes who's saying what, because he wouldn't say that. His white partner would say that. And just see if it worked. And I redid the first 2 episodes that way. And for me, it worked better because Mahershala's race in this time and place enhanced his outsider status. And I even thought about how, as a detective, he would be better at noticing than the other guys, because he's hanging back and nobody's noticing him, and he's watching everything.
Yeah.
And then how, he can actually be pretty good at this and have these blind spots where he's concerned himself. And just and that all this stuff is going on in the character, and it's all nuanced, and it's not like, I don't know how to show that the character is wrestling with a kind of existential shame he believes might be endemic, and he no longer has time to turn around. But the actor can go in there with those feelings, and there's an emotional resonance that translates if it's filmed and performed right. Um, and people talk about the makeup, which was truly spectacular,
Yeah,
but
really great.
Mahershala's old man he didn't use a lot of makeup. There wasn't a lot of makeup. That was entirely Mahershala's extremely meticulous performance. I mean, the way he moved, the way he'd move his head, the way his eyes would move, the way he would speak, uh, that was amazing. And then to see the nuances of emotion that he gave Wayne, and the ambivalence towards himself and others. I I was blown away by Mahershala's performance. I don't know, like I don't know what would be a higher degree of challenge for an actor to play a character at 35, 45, and 72. And
Right.
you're not going to be relying on makeup and stuff. You're going to be the same guy, but he's going to be different in each of these timelines. And you're going to have to do all that pretty subtly.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of those guys that you have stuff on a page, but he takes it somewhere else, and
Oh
you see
yeah.
his soul through his eyes. Through he can
Yep.
convey. That's the magic of film. Something like you said, you can't in a novel or
Yeah.
something. You got to write what he's thinking. In a film, you can't write what someone's thinking. But with Mahershala, you can see what he's thinking and what he's feeling just through his
Yeah.
eyes, through his face, that face, and
Oh
what he
yeah.
conveys.
I,
Uh,
I like you could film his face for an hour just doing nothing, and I think it would be compelling. You know,
yes.
uh, I really do. It's funny you say you can't write what characters are thinking, because there's this scene in season 2 where Rachel McAdams' character and Colin Farrell's character are alone in a hotel, and they're kind of drinking across from one another silently, and they know they're fucked, and they're just kind of sipping and staring at each other. And I wrote a 2-page scene for that. I just wrote, like, nobody says a word. This is what each character is thinking.
Wow.
And I think they like that. But that was for, like, we're just gonna do a minute of silent drinking here. And there needs to be things happening,
Yeah.
that maybe we can't easily identify, but we can feel their power.
Well, that worked. Actually remember that scene. I remember that scene.
Same.
So what? Uh, what for the again for me and also the upcoming writers watching you. So we're talking about these things as if, oh yeah, well he did season one, he did season two, and he did season three, and he wrote three completely different stories. But what is your process? How did you like? Again, to have the three timelines and to change each season that it stands alone, but yet it's somehow connected. I mean, how much of planning did you do, or do you write from your heart? Do you just start writing something? Do you map it
Um,
out? How do you do it?
I, well, it's changed over time, and I used to spend a lot more preparatory time doing, writing about character and doing research, and I eventually came to see that uh, I was putting off working when I did that stuff, and that actually what works best is for me to dive in and to just, like, start this thing that nobody's ever going to see, because before this, if this produces anything of worth, it's going to be, and I think it's presentable, it's going to have to be at a standard. But right now I'm not worried about a standard. I just want to see what's happening. And instead of giving myself some shorthand for, you know where a character comes from, and what the governing complexes of their subconscious are, and how they manifest in the day-to-day actions, and what is it they yearn for, and what is it they fear, and what what seems threatening to them and what doesn't. I I try to have some kind of situation, and if I don't have a situation, just to make myself work so that I am not sitting around waiting for inspiration. You know, I'll just start two voices talking, and eventually one of them will want something, and that'll begin to form some kind of dynamic. Uh, and then you can see if it's worth pursuing or not. Um, Season 3, I just started writing, and now I don't get far at all in the writing before I decide if this is something that I can make good, and if I am going to make it, and if I believe that, then where is this going to go, and how does it end? Um, because I don't think it's good necessarily to start a journey without a destination in mind, but if on that journey the actors not the actors, the characters reveal to you a better destination, you should always be ready to jump tracks.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's
as
interesting. That's very interesting you say that, because there's been a couple things that I imagined some great ending, just a scene that would be an ending to a movie. I went, okay, that's really good. I don't know how we got there, but that's now my job is going to be getting myself to that
yeah,
ending, so,
yeah.
somehow. So
Well,
there's
and
many different ways to approach it.
yeah, but so for season 3, I kind of had that because once I wrote on it a little bit, I was like, well, how does this end? Oh, it ends with the detective solving it, and he forgets he solves it immediately after. Um,
Yes.
which there's a symmetry to that, a tragic element, but that tragic element doesn't have to define him or the journey he undertook. Um, and there can also be great consolation there, but there was a way it made perfect emotional logic, um, especially since so much of what he's been doing is trying to recover his sense of identity along with this case and to remember his wife.
Yes.
So then I was like, okay, well, how do I get to that ending?
Yeah.
Um, and not wanting it to really be like some ghastly murder or something. I I wanted it to be something that in the solving there would be a redemptive element that they wouldn't say, well, you know, we got that evil guy who was cutting women into pieces or something. It was, no, you found the lost girl,
Yeah.
and she did make it, and she made it.
Beautiful ending. It's such a heart wrenching ending, because when you see him and then he doesn't remember, it's like it's like you're getting hit, punched in the stomach, But there's so much going on there. The beauty of finding the girl, but yet his loss of not remembering it. Really, really, really special. Really
And,
amazing stuff.
well, that's really generous of you, Nick. Thanks. And I liked that the detective has to go ask the lost girl to tell him where he is.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Really, 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 really beautiful. So, what you felt that's your trilogy with that show, and you're not moving forward with it anymore?
Well,
Is that correct?
I, I, I mean, I think HBO would have been really happy if I had given them a good script for another True Detective. Um, it would have to be really good, but that was 3 noir shows that lived in degrees of darkness, and career wise, this is probably as stupid as anything I've ever done. But I was just like, I'm happy with these 3. I'm especially happy with the third. uh, I should maybe cash out while I had that high note for me personally. um and just see about doing different things, like see about not immersing myself in murder and
Yeah.
the shadow so much. So I kind of just left that and moving on to other things.
Are you looking to, you think, from this point on, career wise, also direct everything you write from this point forward?
Well, I mean, I don't think I get to direct everything, I write. And I mean, the market is what it is right now. I have an original film I wrote uh that would star Vince Vaughn, and we got Simon Rex to play his brother, and another significant role to cast. But we've been trying to get financing to do that. I'm really proud of that script. I love that script so much, and people's responses to it have been great. Uh, but that's about a singer in Vegas, and it's kind of like a Hal Ashby 70s movie. Um, and then I created a new Western series that I wrote 2 episodes for, and we got Michael Fassbender for the lead, and
Wow.
we've taken it out to studios recently, but it's a tough market. I don't know.
So you want to do different genres. You get a western. You
No,
have a
well, I find even in the genres where I've inserted myself, like crime or police procedural, my best effects come from character, and then if we have an exciting action set piece or the surface elements of the thriller or the mystery genre, those things will be enhanced because of all the character work that that an audience has been invested in. So I think I'm just talking about people all the time, and I just want to talk about different kinds of people doing things besides solving murders. Um, so like the Western, it's very romantic and it's got a lot of adventure. Um, but it's got a really strong vein of humor in it. Like, sometimes it's black humor, but I don't mind saying it's funny. Like it's funny.
That's great. That's great. Well, what would you for the kids out there? What would you what kind of advice would you give them to start out? When they ask me how do I have writer's block or some guys I can't write, I don't know where to start. I just say just get the typewriter or a pen and a pad and just say I woke up this morning, I made myself coffee. Just so writing it, start writing anything. Like to me, writer's block is how do you stop writer's block? Just write anything. So what
Yeah.
advice would you give to some young people that may want to start writing their scripts?
Um,
Big question. I
make, make friends with video game programmers.
know.
Uh, because I don't, this medium's not going anywhere, but the relevance of this medium is plummeting a lot. And in the same way that people still write good novels, they just don't have a cultural impact the way they used to.
Right.
Um, well, I agree with you. I don't believe in writer's block. I think that's like saying you have runner's block if you're a runner. Like,
Yeah.
and well, how do I take up running? You put on your shoes and you go outside and you put one foot in front of the other and repeat. Um, so yeah, I think I used to not be good about this. I used to think and think and think, and then when my levels of inspiration and investigation sort of bubbled over, then I would sit down and I'd write really fast. And now I've started to see it more as, no, I show up and the muse needs to know where to find me. And if I don't have anything to write, or if I'm stuck, if I don't want to write what I'm working on, open up a new document, 2 voices, go.
Wow.
And set yourself a timer and do that for an hour and a half. Put your phone in a drawer in a different part of the house, turn the wireless off, and you can do anything for 90 minutes. Set your timer, 2 voices. If you like anything about what you did that day, go back to them on the second day, but you have to go forward. Anytime you spend writing what you already wrote does not count towards your 90 minutes. If you don't know how to go forward, throw in a third voice, observe those dynamics, see what's happening. You do that for a few days, I mean, you will have the seed of a story, or probably a couple of stories. But I really think it's like you say, it's you you have to do it every day. You have to do it every day. And
Yes.
if you want to write scripts, I would suggest you read literature and stage plays, and work on understanding how those writers achieve their effects, because that's what matters most to you as an aspiring writer, is that you come to understand and internalize how effects are created with words, effects in the audience, how emotional resonance occurs, how surprise and delight occur, because they're not an accident. It's not an accident that work you so greatly admire, that the sentences are in that order, and that the punctuation goes that way. What's happening here? Sentence by sentence, word by word, paragraph by paragraph, what is happening? What is the author doing to the audience that they do not realize he's doing? Because they shouldn't realize you're doing it. And think in those terms, think in terms of trying to understand an engine. You're not just going to be able to understand it makes the wheels go round. You're going to need to know all the mechanisms by which the engine makes the wheels go round. So do it every day. For the love of God, make sure your education does not just consist of movies and screenplays. Really dive into literature, and
Yes.
like these sort of writing prescriptions, they're always like people describing their personal religion, if everybody had a different religion. And there's always something, and I felt this when I was younger too, like we it's funny too, because it's also magical thinking in a way, like, well, tell me about your God. And and do you find the way you worship your God produces favorable results? Because the way I worship mine, he's not answering. Um, but what they're really asking for beyond, is there some kind of performance formula I can plug in and make this work? And of course not. There isn't. And there's no point in asking people those kinds of questions. I'm just saying, as a student, you might find it interesting, but that will not help you at all. You're going to have to find your own way to continue the analogy, to faith. And you're going to have to figure out how to do it on your own. And what you're really asking for is there a shortcut to wisdom and learning your craft? And no, my answer is no. And depending on how young you are and what your natural talents are, you may find mastery of craft happens rather quickly compared to other people, but wisdom will still be far off. And some measure of wisdom and an understanding of the world and curiosity about the world is going to have to be informing what you write, or it's not going to speak to people. You're going to need to know something about people. You're going to need to have thoughts about life based on how you experienced life. And those thoughts and ideas are going to be tested, because you begin to see how flimsy they are once they start hitting the page, and you start to realize your own assumptions about life and yourself are pretty flimsy once you start to put them into words. And so it demands a deeper investigation of yourself and the world and other people, and there isn't a shortcut to that. The best success you can have then in the interim is to learn your craft as well as possible and work within your limitations while pushing your limitations, and be awake to life. Like, be awake to life.
No,
Get
that's
out there and
amazing
live.
advice. And what you said when we started this thing, that you started this whole process of two voices. In your case, two detectives, two guys talking in a car. And I relate to that because Green Book was two guys talking in a car. But look what
Right.
those came out of those two guys talking in the car. In your case, your two guys talking in the car opened up a whole new door. So um, I relate to everything you just said. I think is perfect advice. Literature, reading, all of it, and obviously you've it's worked for you in an amazing way. And
Well, and go do all the other stuff too. Like, go fall in love, for God's sake. Like,
right,
do not stay in a room looking at a computer, a blank
yes,
document, a blank notebook. Put your time in. Something David Milch said that I would like to pass on to every aspiring writer. David showed up to work every day in his professional life and worked from this hour to this hour. And Milch said, when he's not writing, he does not think about writing whatsoever. He doesn't think about what he's working on, nothing.
he's
He
living.
he didn't let it enter his mind until he sat down to work again the next day. And like, that's the place for that. So yeah, I would recommend, like, you're not going to find material sequestered away from the world. Set your time to work, treat it like a debt of honor that you're paying for your past and future selves. And when your time's up, go live, really. You know,
Yeah,
uh, the living's getting thin out there. So
yeah.
so get to it.
Well, Nick, this has been amazing. Quite an honor
So
to
nice.
meet you and talk to you. And
The honor's
thank you
mine.
so
Thank you.
much.